Hello and welcome to Big Closet Small Planet and this special edition for the Climate Action Week hosted by the Scandinavian Textile Initiative for Climate Action. I've been trying to be more enthusiastic, Maxine. So this is I don't know if I've achieved it, but my colleague said, "Come on, Mike, get
You
with it
got
in the
this.
beginning." In any event, glad to have a focus now on some legislation and policy focused in the United States. Oh, the United States. Um, Last year, of course, during Climate Action Week, we had Maxine and others update us on what was happening according to the legislation they're proposing and promoting. And so I wanted to check back in to see where we're at since then. And of course, we have a climate angle to this, but climate and other aspects of sustainability are completely intertwined. So we all know that. But things have happened, I think. I mean, I know because I've been watching, I've been interacting. Things have been happening, and I want to hear what's been happening positively and challenging wise. And so Maxine is here taking her time out to talk to us. And I know she and her colleagues are in the midst of talking to politicians and getting this work moved forward. So we appreciate that she's here taking the time to update us. So without further ado, Maxine, can you remind the audience who you are, what you're doing, the basics?
Sure. So thanks so much for having me on the podcast. So I am Maxine. I'm the director of the New Standard Institute, and we have been working with a very broad and continuingly more broad coalition to pass a bill in New York. And it was introduced in Massachusetts, and then this year it was also introduced in California that we lovingly call the Fashion Act, which is an environmental piece of legislation that is seeking to address the climate and chemical impacts of the industry. That's the broadest brush strokes of what we're doing.
Okay, so as of now, am I correct? You have something going on in New York, which has been going on for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have California, which is a big, big step forward in terms of another massive economy in the
Yep.
world and in the US, and then Massachusetts. So is something actually happening in Massachusetts? Is there a bill being pushed through? Just so we start there.
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, they have a longer, I think, 2-year session, and so that the bill has been introduced there, and I think they're just waiting to see when it's put on the agenda in Massachusetts. That's kind of what kickstarts things. That's where things are in Massachusetts, and in New York, as you mentioned, the bill was introduced several sessions ago. But has continued to build momentum with each session. So at the end of the last legislative session in New York, it was put on the assembly agenda, and we can get into the nuances of New York legislature, but the budget is always in competition with bills like ours. And so we kind of ran out of time the last legislative session, and now I think the budget was 3 weeks late. So again, eating into the time here, but there is an increasing interest coming from the legislature themselves. I think we have over 80 co-sponsors of the legislation. And so we're in the final couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens in New York. And then, yes, in California, which I think is now the 4th largest economy globally,
Well done.
having surpassed Japan, they've introduced the bill, and it in the assembly in California, and it passed through the 2 policy committees, which is the Environmental Toxics Committee and the Natural Resources Committee, so the ones that deal with toxic chemicals, and the other that deals with more climate-related risks. And then was just heard last week in the Appropriations Committee, and we can speak through what happened there, but the term is the bill has been 2-yeared. So basically, we have until the end of January to get it out of appropriations there.
Okay. And so are the bills in each of the states exactly the same?
They are largely the same. There are some marginal differences, and the bills within each committee they go through. There's a kind of fingerprint of that sort of committee, but the major table stakes are the same. In California, the toxics, the way of addressing toxic chemicals is a bit different. So in New York and Massachusetts, it's really following along the sort of ZDHC guidelines in terms of chemistry management. And in California, it's looking at some of the most egregious toxic chemicals that are universally on restricted substances lists of the fashion brands, and just ensuring that no residue remains on the garment when it enters the California market.
Okay, so that when I listen to that, it does sound like one is potentially more progressive or comprehensive if you're using the ZDHC guidelines. Maybe you're being more proactive, whereas the California piece is saying, okay, we're just going to look at the most harmful chemicals and not have a sort of larger standard to adapt or align with, or have I misunderstood?
You have not misunderstood. I think it really depends on whom you are speaking to, on how they frame it. I find it quite interesting to see how people have responded to the various the various ways of approaching it. So ZDHC with the wastewater guidelines is, looking back in the supply chain to ensure that the chemicals are not used within the supply chain. Some people, I would say even probably the toxic folks outside of the industry would say that's too loose, and prefer to have kind of more residue testing, and prefer the approach of California. And, some would say that the ZDHC approach is more broad. So it really, I think, just depends on where you're sitting.
Okay, all right. Interesting. Okay, so let's try to zero in. You talked about the chemicals now, which is, again, let's be clear, chemicals are integral also to climate action in some way in terms of how you use chemicals, how they affect energy use in the production of clothing. So these are not completely independent things, and that's important to emphasize. But the emissions part, the climate action part of these bills, can you just remind the audience where the bills stand on trying to accelerate climate action, reduce emissions for the industry?
Sure. So on both the climate and the toxic side, it really is trying to just use the industry created standards. So it's not the state developing their own standards. It's really just putting the force of law behind what have been standards created by the industry. So on the climate side, it is following the Science-Based Targets Initiative, requiring that companies with global revenue over $100 million that sell into the state of New York, Massachusetts, or California would be required to set and achieve science-based targets. And for companies with over $1 billion in global revenue, they would be required to use the absolute contraction methodology.
Aha. Okay. So tell us more about that. The distinction as you see that.
We see the Science-Based Targets Initiative moving in this direction as well, but just the recognition that the intensity targets, depending on the unit increases, can oftentimes lead to continued growth of emissions, which is not what the framing of the science-based targets is, or the commitment, which is to align with the Paris Agreement. So it really is just following the direction of where the Science-Based Targets Initiative is going, just to ensure that when the companies are setting the science-based targets, that they truly are science-based and aligned with the Paris Agreement, that the emissions of the company themselves are actually decreasing.
Right. So they can't just do intensity reductions. They have to have total emission reductions.
Yep.
Okay. Without getting too far into the weeds, right, in terms of how regulation is done, and I've had conversations with you and your colleagues about this to some degree in the United States. But on one hand, my understanding is that you can set sort of a broad-based bill, but then the devil's in the details after it gets adopted in terms of how it's going to play out, or does everything have to be outlined specifically and in detail when the bill is adopted? And the reason I bring this up is because we know from our own work with climate action that the carbon accounting tools are always in development. There's a lot of weaknesses and strengths in them, like you just mentioned with SBTI. And so if you get stuck legislating for one method that maybe is not where it needs to be, we have problems with getting primary data. People could use average data sets and not really reflect their real climate impacts. How does the legislation address these kinds of new developments and the evolution that needs to take place in the field?
It's a great question. So there is the law, which is the words in the text in the bills that are passed, and then there is the regulations that follow the law. I think it's really an art to make sure, as you were just elucidating very clearly what the challenge is that you want a law that is not arbitrarily stuck in stone. You want a law that helps set expectations, so you want it to be very clear in that way, so that it sets business expectations. It helps businesses align their investments. So you don't want something that is going to be so flexible that the businesses actually don't know, what's going to come through on the regulations. But then you also need to ensure, as you just mentioned, that there is some flexibility in the language, that as the accounting accounting standards develop, that the law isn't stuck in the past in that way. So that's very much how the bills have been written
and
to
framed.
keep that in mind. Yep.
Okay. So you're taking that into consideration, and there are just again penalties also in the bill, right? So if you don't sort of follow the decarbonization pathway as a brand putting products on the California market or the New York market, you then could be financially penalized for not achieving that? Or what are we standing there in terms of the teeth in the bill?
Yeah, that's right. Any piece of legislation, if they just set a standard but there's no penalty, you're not really creating a law very much, or you're creating one in paper only. So the penalties in New York and California, depending on if it's the toxics or the climate side, depending on if it's a first infraction versus a secondary one, and depending on the state, it's between 5, 10, and 15,000 per infraction like on a per day basis or a per infraction basis.
So if for instance, I'm a large brand selling onto the New York market or the California market, my products, and I am doing my annual report, which includes my carbon emissions and my targets. And, right now I've set a 2030 target, maybe a 2040 target, and I'm showing you how I'm doing on the way there.
Yep.
And, generally, it's not clear how much. There's a sense that you have to reduce a certain percent on average per year to reach your target. But some years you may go up and some years you may go down. How does the law take into consideration that aspect?
Yeah, so the law tries to balance the fact that we do need to see the trend going downward, but also, as you just said, that it's not necessarily a linear path on the way down. And also keeping in mind that, of course, the science-based targets are 10-year targets, but executives, I think, stay on average about 4.5 years. So having a law with a 10-year target doesn't create the right immediate incentives to ensure that the companies in the industry more broadly are aligned in this effort. So to address that, the bills say that in a 5-year period, for those absolute targets, there needs to be a reduction needs to be seen. So if you're still growing after your emissions after 5 years, it's a pretty clear indication that at the 10-year mark, you're not going to make it.
So that's fascinating. So you have taken into consideration a couple things. One is, who's in charge in the companies over what period. If people are not really thinking I'm going to be accountable for this while I'm working at this company, then they're not going to do anything. They'll say, I'll leave that to the next person, kind of thing. And that's quite interesting. I hadn't heard that before. So that's new insight to me.
We spoke to many stakeholders in this process, and we spoke to both, had quiet conversation with folks in public companies, as well as conversations, with private companies that are family run and family held. And you can see a big difference in the way in which those companies and executives speak about the commitments, because in the family run, in theory, they're going to be the ones there at the 10-year mark. So, it seems like there's much more realization of the actual challenge in taking on these science-based targets. Whereas when we've spoken to people that have been part of creating and setting these voluntary standards within the public companies, it seemed, there's more excitement about, that it motivates the team, but there seems to be just a little less. And this is just from our conversations. I'm not speaking about data on this, our research on this, but from those conversations, that's what we really picked up is it's easier to make that commitment if you're not going to be around to actually see that commitment follow through. And we're already, we see that not just in fashion now, but in the broader industry, a lot of these companies are walking back their targets that they had set. So
right, no, it does. It seems pretty. Yeah. There's an argument, a logic to that.
Yeah.
That has makes sense. And without sort of getting stuck, but when you say you're penalized per infraction, so again, would it be that if in 5 years my company who's selling on the California or New York or Massachusetts market is not, sort of followed the trend of reducing our total emissions, then that's when the Attorney General's office or something would say, now we're looking at financial penalties for your company.
No, even after that, they have 18 months to get back in line.
18 months to get back in line. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of, there's sort of, okay, yeah. We're telling you, we're giving you 5 years. Yeah. We're then going to give you another 18 months. Yeah. And then we're going to come in. Yeah. So you're giving companies time.
We're giving companies and every step of this time to get the work done and at the same time align the industry so the work starts to happen now.
Right.
It doesn't continue to be delayed.
And again, there are specific sized companies that you're focused on, right?
That's right. It's companies with global revenue over $100 million.
Okay. I know you've said this like for 4 years. So
no, but it's important. It's important to
Maxine,
say.
I'm sorry. You got to remind everybody. Yeah.
I didn't mean to have any tone in my voice.
No, I know. Okay. So a couple things now. When we look at the coalition of people behind it, Uh, I know that there are a ton of NGOs, environmental organizations. There are a couple leading brands in the US, Patagonia, for instance, or such, and you can name them. There's some innovation companies there. Uh, but, and I've been involved in the process to some degree, there are no major industry organizations. There are no sort of global brands, the big sort of legacy brands signed on. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a failure of leadership, quite honestly. I think it is the biggest disappointment in this whole process that we have the AFA, Chamber of Commerce, the Retailers Association opposing this bill when it is using the standards that those same players have set, when those public companies have still in their reports today that those are the targets that they are setting out to achieve. I think it is a massive, massive failure of leadership.
And what do they say when you say, why aren't you signing on? I think I know what they say, but what do you hear?
Well, it's been interesting in California where the uh, the testimony is more public testimony. It's not just private, quiet lobbying, which is what we see in New York. In California, where the Chamber of Commerce, as I said, opposed, the Retailers Association opposed, and the AAFA opposed. The testimony, I think it was coming from the retailers, was how shocking this bill was, that this isn't just about disclosure, this is about requiring emissions reduction. And I think, to me, that testimony, which I put on my LinkedIn just because I was so aghast, I don't know what the right word is,
Aghast is a good word.
at at the end of the day, that's where industry stands, and if you are not in favor of this bill and not actively promoting it, that is the position of the industry. I think that is a shocking and sad state of affairs. I don't know what else to say.
So they want a transparency bill, but not a penalty bill.
They don't want a transparency bill. The transparency bill in California passed, so they were saying how shocking it was to require not just a disclosure of emissions, but a mandate to reduce them.
Okay. And have you heard anything else? Because that's very specific to California. Is there anything else you've heard over the past years?
I mean, it's not necessarily specific to California, because that's the only public insight we get into what is being said behind closed doors in the lobbying that we know these organizations are all doing. And I think to even most close to home, I think the AFA coming out in opposition, and to me, I think any company that is communicating personally feels what in the leadership, that they are really trying to advance a future in which we can all thrive on, that continue to participate in these organizations. I think it's the wrong move. I don't know, like, there needs to be, I think what I find so what just doesn't make sense to me is that this is not counter to industry. This is a bill like this is pro-industry. This is wanting to set the basic guardrails so that the industry can continue to thrive in the future and recognize the facts that this is a collective action problem that we are facing, and this is how you address a collective action problem. And I think that it should be industry driven, this bill. And I think that it is time that I find it's time for a new industry body to take shape that is actively promoting bills like this and saying, we want to be a part of the future. This should not be seen as an activist bill. This is a common sense piece of legislation that is using the same standards that the industry itself has created.
So I'm going to get into that, but I also know that when I hear industry organizations and companies put on the brakes, they often use the argument that they want harmonized legislation, right? That too many pieces of legislation segmented sort of into different states, uh, it's just too hard to administer for them. And again, you can ask, is that the actual case, or is this just a sort of a smokescreen for not wanting to support something that they can't get their company or the industry behind? Uh, so the idea now, this was sort of a segue for me to talk to you about the strategy of having different states implement this as opposed to doing it at the federal level. And I can already guess now, we can all guess now that there may not be any uh, enthusiasm to do it at the federal level. And maybe there, at one point, there was less enthusiasm. And then with the new administration, I would guess negative enthusiasm. But this idea that there are different pieces of legislation, and you can also look that your piece of legislation, as I understand the United States, is not the only textile legislation, right? There's lots of other types of legislation that are being proposed or implemented or discussed for textiles. So this issue of having separate state pieces of legislation and then the industry saying it's just too fragmented, it's not harmonized, we need harmonized legislation across the board, and then we'll get behind that. Do you find that just a smokescreen or bullshit, or what's your sense about that and your strategy there?
That's entirely a smokescreen because, first of all, it is harmonized. I think a good parallel is if every state has a separate seatbelt law. That is not something that is federally regulated. If you are wearing your seatbelt and you cross and go on a road trip, you don't have to change how you wear your seatbelt. You're just do it once and you're going to be in compliance with the law. So it's factually not true. And if they're so concerned about it, then get involved with the legislation, promote it to ensure that it is creating the harmonization that you're seeking. But to use that at the jump to oppose a piece of legislation is, to me, a very clear indication that that is just a smokescreen.
And you haven't experienced so many industry organizations or major brands and retailers actively engage with you to say, we'd like to massage this in a way. We support
Correct.
it. You have
They're,
not.
No, they are
Okay.
not coming and saying, we want to support this. This is what we want to see. No, the thing that we see is no engagement. And then, or the AFA, just a laundry list of things they don't like without saying what it is they want to see. And that isn't effective feedback. To say you don't like the climate targets but aren't going to say what you do want is not helping promote the bill at all. That is
Okay.
only a distraction.
Yeah, and I remember there were some comments from the manufacturing world, some voices, right, that said, well, we don't like SBTI in general as a method because we think this sort of puts the onus on manufacturers.
Oh, that's not a monolith. I wouldn't say the manufacturers have come out in any way, shape, or form saying that they don't like this bill.
They have not. No.
No.
Okay. No, I was
Yeah.
thinking about some critique of how people would want to massage it. I think generally, from our experience, there's a few manufacturers or a growing group who say that the methods by which we're asking manufacturers to set science-based targets is not effective because there are different different conditions in different countries and localities that make it easier or harder to reduce your emissions.
I wouldn't say that is a monolithic point of view. I think we're seeing a lot of interest coming from manufacturers because at the moment they are the ones, it's kind of an empty requirement, but is not aligning with, the purchasing practices of the company. So you help make it into law and you require, we worked with the manufacturers on this as well. You require, as we do in the bills, to disclose the resources that you are utilizing to help these companies achieve their targets, help the manufacturers, and that goes a long way.
Which is great, right? You're saying that the buyers need to invest in this, and they need to show how they're investing in this. Okay, interesting. So again, just quickly back to this idea of, and maybe it's obvious to everyone who's listening, this idea that you've decided to work at the state level versus at the federal level. And is it simply because of what I said, which is there's no appetite at the federal level to do this?
That's right. And I mean, California, with all due respect to the EU, California is the fourth largest economy in the world. So
What are
it's
you
not like.
saying? Are you all of a sudden you're like, "Hmm, it's like you got nothing on California."
That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is that that's this sort of idea that, oh, it's like these, podonky states. Like, it's not. These are major economic players.
That's right. Okay. Uh, do you see any chilling effect from the Trump administration and their work, or because California and New York tend to be more democratic, not fully, especially New York State, but that there's a more appetite just for those states, and this will never be something that quote unquote red states would be interested in.
I mean, I don't think in New York, for example, it's a bipartisan bill. I think because the players, that New York industry, I think McKinsey did research, I think it was from 2018 to today, there's been 50,000 fewer fashion-related jobs in New York City. So it's not just an environmental argument. There's a business argument and a jobs argument to be made as well, that when you hollow out any standards, and the players that are gaining the most market share are foreign companies at the expense of New York companies. So it's not just a left issue in the classic sense. And we're seeing that play out in New York. In California, I think there's just maybe more partisanship. I can't speak with any. That's just our experience thus far.
Mm.
That could change, though.
Right.
But I think it's more the states are really needing to show leadership in what is now a leadership vacuum on a federal level, and I think we'll see where they land on whether they step up to the plate or not.
And is the argument about companies like the ultra fast fashion, right? We've had the fast fashion, the Sheins, the Temus,
Yep.
still something that resonates. Like, these are the companies hollowing out our own industry, not playing by the same standards and rules, and we can't have this, and this is a competitive issue for our state.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Are you watching at all what's happening in Europe in terms of textile legislation? Does that come across your desk, or sort of inspire or scare you in terms of what's happening there?
I do. I was about to mention, it's not just what other states are doing vis-a-vis the federal government, but what the rest of the world is doing vis-a-vis what is happening at the federal level in the U.S. And I do think now we're going to see around the world whether we continue to have leadership or we just pretend that the climate crisis, the environmental crisis is just not a thing and stick our heads in the sand. So I think it's really globally a time of reckoning, not just, the states versus the U.S. federal government, but Europe versus the U.S. federal government.
I remember, I was thinking about the non-climate arguments, right? You have the business argument, the competitive argument, but the health argument, it's something that I think was raised when we met in New York State, and I thought this is an interesting angle that's not being really pushed in Europe, right? What in Europe, the issues of ultra fast fashion, that's a competitiveness issue. It's saying we're getting all these products that aren't following the same laws that we are, and they're winning, we're losing, and this just doesn't work. So now there are bills in the parliament to address the ultra fast fashion. So that's happened. But none of the arguments are, well, sort of the fast consumption is actually making kids mentally ill. right? That
Yeah.
they're sick from all this overconsumption, that they're unhappy, that they're not feeling good by the algorithms that make them purchase all this. Is that something that comes up at all still? Or is that
Absolutely.
does it?
Well, yeah. So two things. One is the health, the physical health in terms of the toxic loads. There's that research that South Korea did. There's been research out of the EU on the lead, the phthalates, the formaldehyde that is showing up, on every time it's tested on the Shein and Temu garments. So I think there's that just research to understand of what's actually coming into the marketplace through these products. And then there's also it was ThreadUp that did the survey that found that 1 in 3 Gen Zers feel addicted to fast fashion, and I think there is this the most vocal and persuasive folks in our coalition are the young people, and particularly in California and in New York. That's not fair. In both states, they are really showing up in droves, and it's them speaking about how they feel being targeted relentlessly by all of these ads to keep purchasing. And I think that now that legislatures are understanding the addictive nature of social media, they are more open to understanding how social media is being used by these companies to push endless product, which is then having an impact on young people, and then, of course, ending up in the landfills for the state to deal with.
So, if you were to guess the chances that these bills will be finally adopted, and now I know this is a tough question because we need to be optimistic. We are pushing forward it. We see a lot of progress. I say we, as you've described your coalition. So it's moving forward step by step. There are always hurdles and challenges with budgets and trade-offs and convincing enough bipartisan support. But are you optimistic?
I don't have a crystal ball in these things. Every legislature, every session is different. What I can say is the coalition is broader, it is stronger, and what I can also and we've I think the stronger the business voice is in all of this, and the companies that we do have on board, and them being public in not just having private conversations, but showing up for testimony, showing up in their own social channels, in PR, in saying that this is something that is a priority, in recognizing, I think, helping the public and the legislatures understand that the solution for the industry is not going to be just one company driven, but has to really be from across the industry, meaning through legislation. That's going to be some of the most important part of this push, and what will or will not get this bill over the finish line. Because at the moment, if you look back at the testimony that I'm referring to that was in the Natural Resources Committee, it was the Assemblywoman who is leading the charge on the bill, Assemblywoman Addis. It was myself as the expert, and a college student, versus the various different trade associations, and now, in addition, the Chemical Council coming in opposition. And so I think, again, I don't have a crystal ball. I know the facts are not going to change. And I think it's really a time of reckoning for the industry to say, for each company to see what is ahead, if they as a company can achieve their targets on their own, and if they can't achieve the targets on their own because of the nature of this industry, that the industry and the leaders in the industry come together and have their voices heard. I think that's going to be the thing over and above, in addition to the grassroots and all of the NGOs and all of the students who are pouring their hearts out into this, that is going to get these bills over the finish line.
And so that, I'm guessing that answers my final question, but tell me if I'm wrong. My final question to you is, if you could choose one thing that would happen in the next 6 months to a year, maybe that's too long a time frame, but in the time frame that's relevant to accelerate or make it more likely that these bills will pass and be implemented, it sounds to me like that's what you would answer. You want some more business, commercial actors to go public in support of it, or am I misunderstanding?
No, that's absolutely right. It's the coalition, the partners that we have being as vocal as they can be. I think especially those that are in the AFA and having the AFA in opposition, I think that is something that needs to be questioned. But I think ultimately it's a group of companies that really do see themselves as leaders and do want to lead the industry forward, that they come together, and this is for this bill, but for other initiatives that are happening, and create their own trade association that really represents the trade of the future, and not what the industry associations currently are doing, which is just trying to keep the status quo, which is a destructive status quo.
Maxine, I can hear in your voice you've been talking to a lot of people. So, with that, we want to thank you very much for updating us all on what's happening.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Our pleasure.